Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Today, the West's reaction to India's bad behaviour steps up a gear. In the US, the Department of Justice indict and launch a global manhunt for Vikas Yadav in the Gurdas Singh Panun assassination attempt case. The other Five Eyes nations also start moving their slow state machinery into alignment as they begin to jointly acknowledge that India maybe has indeed gone rogue. We report on the varying responses from across the globe and, well, India's response? A weak anti-Canada propaganda shot through one of its many media mouthpieces. So badly designed even the RCMP are stamping down on it. And Sikhs are out in force once again in protest, and yet again all Hindutva can do in typical response is resort to violence. Well, all this and more in today's show. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus. I hope all of our viewers had an amazing weekend, and thank you for all the amazing comments. Keep them coming. We love reading them.
Indeed we do, and together we'll be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we'll be taking a look at loads of your great comments today, which have been filling up below the video, so thank you as always for those. Right, James, let's get going. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
The big news was, of course, the superseding indictment that was unsealed by the U.S. courts in the Southern District of New York. Now, they have named Vikas Yadav, and he is very much involved and confirmed to be involved with the not only attempted assassination or assassination plot against Mr. Putin, but they also got him in terms of evidence on behalf of Canada. It very clearly outlines his role in the assassination and the hiring of individuals to assassinate Mr. Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. The indictment, of course, came out, and it is really scathing that it not only confirms what Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government has been saying, the RCMP and CSIS also obviously knew this information because they've been sharing it with the FBI, going back and forth, as well as other Five Eyes nations. Now, let's take a quick peek at the indictment. We're not going to go through it all just because it is very lengthy and we only have an hour on the show. As always, we'll be fighting for time. However, it does confirm that he was a Secretariat of the Government of India, and he was also, in terms of the department, was responsible, or in the same department that houses India's Foreign Intelligence Service, known as RAW, or the Research and Analysis Wing, and his actual offices were in the same building. And now they've described him as a senior field officer with responsibilities in security management and intelligence. He also has served in India's Central Reserve Police Force, which is their largest paramilitary force. He has used several aliases, and Yadav has used Amanat as an alias, and of course that is outlined as well because it comes into play throughout the indictment and the investigation. Now, it claims that Yadav was working with and had actually recruited Gupta to orchestrate the assassination in the United States. Of course, they have taken the names out and only replaced the names of the victims with that word victim. And that's typical of an indictment to not name, although we know who it is. Furthermore, it goes on to state that he has a different criminal source, and that will be referred to throughout the indictment as the term CS. And then undercover officer is, of course, UC for undercover throughout the indictment. Now, we will kind of take a quick peek at some of these, but we'll also scroll through slowly. So you can pause your screen and take a look at the indictment, or you can always send us an email and we'll send you a PDF copy of it. But it is available on the U.S. Justice Department website. So just so you're clear that this is the actual indictment that is released by the U.S. Justice Department. We haven't been editing or creating any fake information because we don't work for the government of India. So in any event, the day-to-day conduct also showed throughout the investigation that there were payments made to the undercover officer. They have photos and other video recordings of the payments and the discussions confirming again of his involvement. It goes quite deep into that, but they also show that he had not only gone after Mr. Najjar, but also in terms of Mr. Poonen, and they had many other targets that they were going to deal with as well. And when they say deal with, of course, they're referring to extrajudicial killings and foreign interference, among other things. Now, this here indictment also covers there we go. There's a photo here. Sorry, I was just scrolling down. But it also covers other intelligence and other information that has not previously been released, and that being that they had private addresses and such. And that, I would assume, would be what Mr. Trudeau and the RCMP were referring to when they said that they were using their intelligence gathering operations in Canada and around the globe to get the information on individuals of interest to the government of India. Now, this goes on to continue with many other points that, again, we don't have enough time to cover everything. But again, I'm just scrolling through so that you can take a look at it yourself if you pause on your screen. Now, they have many different types of recordings, whether it's audio through telephone conversations, but they also have text messages, they have videos on the phone. And one point that's very important to point out is that when they were looking at arranging the assassination of Mr. Poonen down in the States, they also had targeted Mr. Hardeep Singh Nijjar. But Mr. Gupta, although was expecting that contract in Canada, it went ahead without him. They used other individuals for that one. However, with that said, Mr. Yadav actually sent him a video of the assassination of Mr. Najjar, which is concrete evidence that he was involved. He had video of it shortly after the incident happened. So, and it was, definitely video coverage to confirm that the job had been done by the individuals that were contracted by the India government and by Mr. Yadav. So that is a very, very telling point that is very essential to this case. And it really ties it all together, not to mention all of the in-depth conversations that they had. Now, one of the only real limits that they had is that they did not want the assassination to take place while Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in the U.S. for bilateral meetings and other events. Now here you can see a screen grab from one of the payments being made of a $15,000 down payment on the assassination plot. And again, this is all part of the U.S. government's evidence that just really backs up Canada's claims. Now, of course, with this coming out and showing the solid evidence, it still appears that India is steadfast in denying that they had any involvement in the Najjar case, and yet it's outlined in black and white here. In response, of course, India comes back and they started to accuse several Canadians who are of Sikh background that they were involved in killings within India and that they're wanted for terrorism charges and others. And this has just been going on all weekend, with yesterday, or about 36 hours ago, a video by News X, which we know is a mouthpiece of the government of India. Now, they came out and actually named a Canadian Border Services agent as wanted by India, that they want him extradited to their country. But further to that, they went and actually posted his home address and his full date of birth, all this information, which of course puts a target not only on the CBSA agent, but of course, anybody in his home, including his kids and wife if he has them. But it just really puts a threat to life right there in black and white against a Canadian Border Services agent and Canadian government employee. And that also is being investigated. Now, here's a quick clip of that. And this is, again, the NewsX report here that they had named Sandeep Singh Sidhu and given his home address. We've redacted the address and covered it up. We don't want to be a part of providing an address in an unsafe report.
Slow that down a bit so I can just explain it for our viewers, please, before we switch the slides. Let's also quickly tell you a bit more now about Balwinder Singh Bhikwin. So he is now famous for his legendary battles against Khalistan terrorists. And he also attacked multiple times, and every time he managed to be back heavily armed terrorists. And he's inspired people across the state to defend themselves against the scourge as well. He and his family made their village into a fort when terrorism in fact was on the rise in Punjab, and he trained his family, including his wife and children, in the use of arms as well. He bravely of course made it to international media, and he was even awarded the Shaurya Chakra for his exemplary courage. Now, if we, of course, talk about the nexus, then clearly, of course, the target, Balwinder Singh Bhikwin, Shaurya Chakra awardee, mastermind, Lakhbir Singh Road, is an ISI operative. And these are, of course, the individuals who were hired by Road and by, of course, the conspirators, Sandeep Singh Sidhu, Sukhmeet Pal Singh, a gangster, Gurjot Kaur, a KLF operative in the US, and Harmeet Singh, who's a chief of the KLF. So it's a shocking nexus, of course, something which, of course, Canada will not speak about because they'd rather, dilly-dally and blame India falsely. But let me quickly join Prabhu Dayal, former diplomat, onto the broadcast. We also have Major General Sudhakarji, defense expert, joining us live. Vicky Nangjappa, journalist tracking internal security, is live with us. Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist, also joins us live on the broadcast. Welcome all of you, and thank you for being with us today. Let me make a start with you first, Prabhu Dayal, on this latest allegation that Canada is now facing. What do you make of what they will do now with this individual, Sandeep Singh Sidhu, who's been named by India as an accused, and in fact we want him deported as soon as possible?
So as you can see there, Angus, it is sorry, I just lost my video there. So as you can see with that report, it's quite telling that they are accusing now, of course, Trudeau and our border services, as well as others, as being in bed with Pakistan to go against India, which again is the same line over and over by Modi and his government, that they have no involvement, that it's all just a conspiracy against the India government and to break up India. But that's not the case at all, as we report over and over, is that the Khalistan referendum is just that. It's a referendum. It's not there to break up a nation. It is there to give people the choice on their future. And regardless as to whether Punjab becomes independent, it's still a part of the region that they could actually work together and be so much better off as allies, instead of this fight that goes back and forth. So, the referendum is just one step, but it is a very important step. And it's very important that people have that opportunity to have their voices heard. And that's what India is all about suppressing at this time, Angus. And, we see it here in Canada. But again, as you stated earlier, we're starting to see a bit more pushback out of the UK and other countries now that they're seeing that.
Indeed. I think the big question that everybody really wants to know is the government of India involved in this plot? And I think it's very apparent, certainly going through the indictment, that all fingers are pointing to the government of India, to obviously the highest level, and of course that includes Narendra Modi. It's clearly, I think, publicly assumed across the world that the government of India are behind the plot. In terms of actual evidence being presented, I think there is an increasing amount of evidence pointing to this fact. I think just the fact that they've managed to to link this whole indictment against Yadav to the Nijar case. So it's now spanning borders, it's spanning international borders between Canada and the US. And that, by implication, in just simple logic, implies that this is no small plot. It is a wide-scale plot with obviously a lot of complexity that does include reporting back to a central source in India. Now, that does not point to just random killings or whatever, or just a bit of a bit of argy-bargy, should we say, a little political argy-bargy. This points to something a lot more complex, a lot more organised, and therefore, by implication, it's got to have come from the Indian intelligence services. And again, logically, the Indian intelligence services would not get up to such a large-scale complex plot without the oversight of, firstly, their head of the agency, which by implication then in turn brings in Narendra Modi. So I think it is absolutely doubtless that the Indian government are behind this whole plot. So that really establishes that. Now, so what's happened since then, I think actually paints quite a large and quite disturbing picture. Disturbing, yes, in the fact that this is a government, this is a nation that's actually gone rogue. I think what's more disturbing is India is proving itself to be pretty, I think clumsy is an understatement. I would say pretty amateurish, and certainly not portraying itself in any mature way that, again, as I keep saying, if it wants a seat at the top table, it's going to have to behave a lot better than this. And the problem is, the intelligence communities around the world, they operate globally through various rules, let's call them unwritten rules, and all sorts of things, let's say, go on behind the scenes that the public never go on. There are killings, there is violence, there are assassinations that go on, but they all operate under, shall we say, globally acceptable rules. And this has been going on for, well, centuries actually, but certainly in the last decades of the Cold War, there was, should we say, a long-established protocol that East and West established between themselves where, yeah, lots of nasty stuff went on, but they all always went within rules. And those goings-on, those operations always operated below the radar, and they never really entered the criminal field at all. And they were just kept within the intelligence communities. However, India has shown its immaturity, its amateurishness in this regard. The Indian intelligence agency, RAW, has actually shown itself up to be a little clumsy and just not very good, and not really understanding the global rules of operations here, because now it's been caught with its pants down. It's launched this global operation to kill Khalistani activists, and it's broken every rule within the intelligence community, and it's strayed into criminality. And this is why it's been caught out. This is why Western intelligence is holding it up and shoving it out of the intelligence operations box into the criminal box, because they're saying, look guys, you can't just go around the world killing your political opponents so openly and using proxy criminal gangs, because that's just not the way the intelligence community does these things. And essentially, it's actually slightly embarrassing for India because, again, the Western intelligence agencies are just holding RAW up and saying, look, guys, you're a bunch of clumsy amateurs. This is not how you go about operations like this. And you're going to pay the price for this. And that price is for you guys to be pushed into the criminal protocols, and your guys will now be the subject of global manhunts, will be the subject of criminal indictments, which is actually extremely embarrassing for any intelligence community. You certainly don't see members of the CIA or MI6 or CSIS or whatever being globally charged under criminal laws, because they operate a lot more intelligently, excuse the pun. So yeah, I think that, as I say, that there's two levels to this, James. I think certainly there's the simple fact that it's very clear the government of India are involved in this, which in itself is proving that what everybody's been saying is that India is basically going rogue. And secondly, it's just proving that India's intelligence agencies are just really not up to the job. They really cannot operate on a global stage without jumping into basic, clumsy, amateurish criminality, which again is pretty embarrassing for India. And it just shows that India is just not ready to join the global top table on any level. So yeah, thanks for that, James. I think that's very interesting and very insightful.
Absolutely. It's going to be interesting because it also, there was talks in the works of expanding the Five Eyes program with a secondary or another agency that would have 13 eyes, as they called it. They wouldn't be privy to all information of the Five Eyes, but they would be brought into a lot of intelligence gathering and that, which also potentially included India. So now this really, the U.S. is going to have to take a double look at this and decide whether or not this is still an option to move forward with. And the U.S. is pretty much the leader of the Five Eyes, and they've got a lot of clout when it comes to deciding how and where to move forward. So it's going to be interesting to see how that moves forward in the future. And I do believe that it has probably set India way back on that. But again, it's also a matter of requiring certain partnerships and strategic alliances in the region to really keep an eye on Russia and China. So it's going to be a balancing act. And in final on that one, Angus, is Lawrence Bishnoi has reportedly had all of his other murder charges and other charges except for one extortion charge thrown out by a judge last week. And so he could be out of prison real soon. And that's another question. Is this got to do with him getting his payment in kind to by the Indian government for his involvement in his gang's involvement? Or, what exactly is going on there? The judge says that it was because of misconduct and a dereliction of duty by officers. But I think that there's probably a lot more going on there than what we see. So with that, let's move on to the next story, and that has to do with a protest. And this happened at the Bob Hope Theater in Stockton, California, of course, protesting Gurdas Maan, who is an entertainer. He is touring the U.S., but his shows have been the subject of several different protests because of the way that he speaks out against Sikhs in a very negative light. And he comes out with these apologies because his promoters and others that are, financing his programs or his show. And, he comes back to the Indian media and denies that he actually was genuinely apologizing to anybody.
ਹੋਰ ਕੁਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਇਹਨੇ ਔਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬੇਕਰਫੀਲਡ ਵਾਲਾ ਵੀ ਫਲॉप ਰਿਹਾ ਡੈਲਸ ਵਾਲਾ ਵੀ ਫਲॉप ਰਿਹਾ ਔਰ ਗੁਰਦਾਸ ਮਾਨ ਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਲੈਣੇ ਸੀ ਲੈ ਗਿਆ ਹੁਣ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਧੂਆਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਮਿਰਚਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਲੱਗਦੀਆਂ ਗੰਜੇ ਦੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਭਾਟੀਏ ਦੇ ਅਰੇ ਚੀਕਾਂ ਮਾਰਦੇ ਚੀਕਾਂ ਪੈਂਦੀਆਂ ਪਟਿਆਲੇ ਤੱਕ ਸੁਣਦੀਆਂ ਭਾਟੀਏ ਦੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਨੂੰ
So again, that was just a quick clip of them outside of the Bob Hope Theater in Stockton, California. And this happened over the weekend where, again, the group was pepper sprayed. So we're going to have more details and more reports on that tomorrow night, Angus. But I just wanted to bring it up that yet another protest that was, I call it violently interrupted because of the pepper spray being released on the protesters, which is just not acceptable in today's society. Whether you're protesting the price of cheese or you're protesting the Gurdas Maan incidents that have taken place. So we'll cover that again in further detail tomorrow night, Angus.
Indeed, and once again, well done to the Sikh community for turning out in such great numbers in this protest. It was very vocal, it was very visible, very high profile. Great to see the Satluj TV team were out there broadcasting live. I know Surinder was present as well. So yeah, well done to everybody for turning up on that. And yeah, once again, as you said, James, it's I think it just highlights just who is on the winning side and who's on the losing side of this argument. Because once again, if indeed, there was yet another pepper spray attack against the Sikhs in attendance, it just shows up who actually are the criminals, who are the terrorists here. And, the wonderful thing is the truth always prevails, as we keep saying. And the West are now starting to have their eyes opened. It doesn't matter how widespread the Indian narrative is. It doesn't matter how far and wide they broadcast their propaganda across their own channels. Is that incidents like this, all it's doing is it's just waking up more and more people to the fact of who is actually sitting on the right side of this argument. And the more that the Sikh communities come out and protest visibly, peacefully, and always with good humour and again making a very high profile, but very visible, very democratic profile, it means that the argument is being won, because again the violence that's being launched against them, both from a governmental level, which is just hilarious in its own right, and again is just bringing down India as a nation in terms of its credibility and its reputation, but at a grassroots level, Hindutva agents, Hindutva activists are out there pepper spraying protests. We just don't do that here in the West. That is being stamped down on by local law enforcement. It also means that local news outlets are on it, and therefore national news outlets are on it. They broadcast these attacks, and all it's doing is just painting the picture once again of who the real terrorists are. And it's certainly not the Khalistanis, it's certainly not the Sikh community, it's India and it's Hindutva activists. It's these fools, these idiots who are just bringing down India as a nation. So yeah, thanks for that, James. And yeah, as you say, we'll have more of that hopefully tomorrow. We might even possibly have coverage of that second pepper spray incident. So thanks for that, James. Right, okay, in the interest of time, let's rush on. And I've cobbled together, there's been a lot of reaction, unsurprisingly, to the events of the last week or so. And of course, enough days have passed that all the various nations, all the various organisations around the world have had time to take stock of the enormity of what's actually happened here. And of course, it's a huge thing that's happened from certainly an international perspective. And of course, around the world, all the nations have had no choice. They've been pressured by events into responding formally. They've now had time to put their affairs into order and decide, okay, how are we going to approach this, and what tack are we going to take? What public image are we going to portray? In which side of the fence are we going to sit? And to what level of force do we kick back on this? So I've drawn up a very quick, rude and crude graphic that I call the Pyramid of Anger here. And this basically summarises graphically I would say the levels of response to India's actions. And certainly sitting at the top of that fiery pyramid is Canada. And clearly, James, Justin Trudeau has been really, I think, a tour de force on this. He has been quite robust in his language. He has not held back. He has laid the blame absolutely fairly and squarely at the Indian government. He's used very diplomatic language, but he's been completely vocal about it, and he's not held back. And I'll just quickly play at the latest phase of the the foreign interference inquiry. He was interviewed once again. This is the second time he's appeared in public, and he has said the following statement. Let me just quickly play this for you.
So will you consider suspending those intelligence and information sharing agreements that can be misused by the government of India to target Sikh activists, particularly considering the evidence we've seen that India engages in foreign interference and disinformation for that objective?
As I've said a number of times, we are not looking to provoke or create a fight with India. The Indian government made a horrific mistake in thinking that they could interfere as aggressively as they did in the safety and sovereignty of Canada. And we need to respond in order to ensure Canadians' safety. What other steps we will take will be determined in due course, but every step of the way, our single overarching priority is ensuring that we are keeping all Canadians safe.
Okay, so there's two very, very important parts to his response there, if you pick apart the language. Firstly, he calls it a horrific mistake. There's no diplomatic language there. That is absolutely unambiguous. This is, you've made a big, big mistake, India. And the second part there is absolutely, again, no ambiguity. Who's behind this? The Indian government. He actually says it's the Indian government. There's no couch language here, no non-condemnation. This is very clearly laying the blame on the Indian government, not the intelligence services, the Indian government. So that's a very, very important statement that Justin Trudeau's made there. So the Canadian response has, as I say, been completely powerful, robust, unambiguous. Now, the next layer of the pyramid is the United States. Now, the United States have actually been pretty forceful themselves. Not quite as overt in their language, but they have been very robust in terms of their actions. And of course, James, as you've reported, they're taking very clear action against Yadav. This indictment does, I mean, if you read between the lines of the indictment, the whole thing is thick with language pointing to not just raw, but also to the Indian government by extension and implication. So the US government have actually been pretty forceful, and again, they have named the Indian government and certainly the Indian bodies like RAW within all their indictments and their public language. So again, they're not quite as robust as Canada, but certainly they're standing pretty much shoulder to shoulder with Canada. So I would say a well done to North America. Now things start to get a little bit shady, a little bit ambiguous, a little bit weaselly, I think is the word that I would describe it. The UK. Now, the UK has been a little bit more couched in its language. And as I said last week, the UK has not publicly condemned India, much to its shame. But that is part of its track record. The UK has never, or very, very rarely ever, said anything negative about India. And likewise, in this outrageous attack on North American soil and potentially UK soil with Avtar Singh Kanda, the UK has been very traditionally reserved in its language, has not condemned India overtly, but it has talked about the rule of law. And I'll talk a little bit more about the UK's response in a moment. And below them we have Australia, followed by followed by New Zealand. So the Southern Hemisphere states likewise have been even more reserved in their response. There has not been any public condemnation of India. Again, it's just been a lot of weaselly words, but I'll come on to those individually in a moment. Right. So let's take a look, James, at the UK response in more detail. Now, finally, the UK has actually had no choice but to align itself with North America and been a little bit more active in terms of what they've been responding to and what they've been saying publicly. Now, the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office, that's led by the government's Foreign Minister, David Lammy, have finally released a statement which said, "We are in contact with our Canadian partners about the serious developments outlined in the independent investigations. The Government of India's cooperation with Canada's legal process is the right next step." And furthermore, it was confirmed that the issue has been taken up with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, by Justin Trudeau, saying, quote, "Over the weekend, Trudeau and the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, discussed recent developments related to a targeted campaign against Canadian citizens by agents linked to the Government of India." That's interesting, agents linked to the Government of India. So they haven't completely brushed it under the carpet. They have acknowledged that they are agents of the Government of India. The leaders discussed the need to ensure the safety and security of their citizens and the importance of upholding and respecting the rule of law. Again, slightly weasel words here. Trudeau underscored Canada's continued interest in cooperation with India to address this serious matter. Prime Minister Trudeau and Starmer agreed to remain in close and regular contact. So again, very diplomatic words, not quite as robust as North America, but they have no choice but to acknowledge, yeah, things are pretty serious. And the responses were welcomed by British Sikh activist groups amidst the belief that previous UK regimes under the Conservative Party have not adequately responded to this evidence of transnational oppression. And again, I think there's still a loyalty to the Labour government, the current new Labour government from the Sikh organisations here in the UK. They still believe that the Labour government under Keir Starmer will be a little bit more forceful against India. And that they will honour their promises to launch an investigation into the British involvement in 1984, the attack on the Ahmadiyya Sahib, etc. So I'm a little bit more reserved. I'm a little bit more sceptical about this. I wouldn't say I have as much faith as the Sikh organisations here in the UK in the current Labour government. I've seen a lot of backtracking. I've seen both Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, and Keir Starmer both backtracking on their language. Yes, they're now in government. They have to be a bit more diplomatic. But I reserve my judgment here. I think, and I hate to say this, I think Sikh organisations here in the UK are going to be a little bit disappointed with the actions of the current Labour government, but I may be proved wrong. Let's see what happens, and we'll keep an eye on that. Now, one of the high-level respected Sikh human rights advocacy activist organisations here in the UK, Kesri Lahar, they've issued a statement, quite a strongly worded statement, for India to be classified as a rogue nation for its breaches of international law. And they've been pretty forthright in their language. And they released a press release over the last few days in response to events. And they call it an urgent call to recognise India as a rogue state and impose sanctions, indeed, on India for human rights violations against Sikh activists. And they call on the British government, the European Union, the United Nations and democratic nations to, firstly, sanction Indian officials responsible for these actions, to, secondly, launch an international investigation into India's transnational repression, to increase protection for Sikh activists worldwide, and finally to suspend security operation with India until these violations are addressed. So again, they're pretty strong in their language. Unsurprising, it is a Sikh organisation who've been warning about what India's been up to for years. They, of course, have been vindicated. And again, it's pretty much, look, we told you so. Now you have to take actual, tangible effects. You have to take tangible things against India, which includes, firstly, labelling it as a rogue state, and secondly, as a result of that, you've got to sanction India. So again, pretty strong language. So we move on to Canada, James. Let's have a quick chat about Canada's reaction. Now, of course, we've talked a lot about Trudeau. Trudeau has been pretty robust in this. Now, one interesting thing that came out over the last few days, and actually in his evidence delivery at the Foreign Interference Convention, he said, following the revelations about India's diplomats refusing to allow themselves to be investigated regarding this event, Trudeau has revealed that he actually has names of parliamentarians in Canada involved in foreign interference. This is powerful stuff. So what he's actually said is he actually knows those politicians who have been involved with India, who have actually, let's say, have had hands in their pockets, so to speak, from India, who've been influencing them in turn to influence Canadian politics. Now, the Liberal Party Prime Minister has made the statement whilst being questioned at this inquiry, and the statement, which specifically mentioned foreign interference in the Conservative Party, of course, is Polyev, who's been involved in this, has triggered mass introspection by political commentators of the country who dug out all sorts of examples of what they call shady connections between India and the Conservative Party of Canada. And certainly one social media post by Catherine Whelan has said, remember this, how many Conservatives had what she called a trip to Canada? Why? Especially provincial politicians. It makes no sense unless, of course, they've had their palms greased by India to influence their politics. And Canadian Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has responded by demanding that Trudeau release those names. He said, look, it's all very well making this bold statement saying we have names. He said, well, OK, then he's calling his bluff. He's saying release those names. And actually, it's potentially a sentiment that many Sikhs align with, saying, OK, look, Trudeau, you've said this. You've got to release these names. You cannot just say a statement like this. Show us the evidence, because this evidence is explosive. It basically proves everything that the Sikh community have been warning about. And and one thing that James will talk about in a moment is there have been a lot of questions around the fact that Polyev, as leader of the opposition, he has the right to ask to see all the intelligence that the Canadian government itself, the government in power, that they have the right to see. They are briefed on a daily basis about what's going on from the intelligence community that's going on in the world. And of course, he would then have full knowledge of what the intelligence agencies are seeing about this whole situation. As leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre has the right to see that same intelligence, so of course he can respond accordingly. He has refused, for some reason, to see that intelligence. He's refused to accept the same level of security clearance, meaning that a pass to allow him to hear these briefings raises suspicions. Why has he placed himself away from being involved in examining issues like this? And along with this, further information is coming out from the Canadian media about the exposure of India's transnational repression. This includes more Indian officials may be forced to leave Canada. So this may be just the start of what's being uncovered. The highest level of the operation is in New Delhi and includes senior figures in the Indian government, individuals who are, of course, completely beyond the reach of Canadian law enforcement, and that manipulation via visa issuing reported by Indian officials towards targets extending into threats of physical harm through being able to pattern family ties. Now, James, your thoughts, please, on Pierre Poilievre and what's going on. Clearly, there's a lot more beneath the surface here in Canada.
Absolutely. Here in Canada, as you stated clearly, that as the leader of the opposition, he has full right and actually a responsibility to get his top security clearance so that he can review these reports. He is trying to get into the election next year with the goal of being the next prime minister, and yet he will not get top security clearance. There's a lot of reasons that could be behind that, but we aren't going to sit here and speculate on that. We're just going to say why. Why will he not get it? Why will he not proceed through the background checks and all the investigations that come with getting that clearance? And a part of it is because he can continue to lie about different topics. He can talk about them publicly. If he was to get the top security clearance, it would be completely illegal and out of context for him to even open his mouth on subjects of top security level, let alone to be bold-faced lying about it. And this is where he wants to be. He wants to be able to continue to spew his opinions without fact and to mislead the voters. So I think that's got a lot to do with it. Now, if you keep in mind that there was also accusations of foreign interference in the last leadership race for the Conservative Party of Canada. So again, we'll have to watch and see. And finally, of course, if there are politicians and parliamentarians that are involved knowingly and willingly within the context of interfering with the Canadian political system or in Canadian policy, then there would be simultaneously having criminal and other investigations that are going on at this time. And to come out and put the names forward may interfere with those police and government investigations that are taking place. It could jeopardize any future criminal charges or other litigation that could come out of it. So that's something that people really have to focus on, is that he cannot, it's just like with the CSIS information in relation to the foreign interference and the murders and assassination attempts and so forth. He has to be careful of what information he gives out to the public before the actual prosecution process has taken place and been fairly gone through within the court system of Canada. So that, there's a balancing act, but Pierre Poilievre could have all this information if he would just get his top security clearance. He says that his chief of staff has top security clearance and hasn't brought any concerns to his attention. But at the same time, top security clearance, that chief of staff is not allowed to discuss those topics or any of that subject matter with him directly. So for him to say that he relies on his chief of staff, either A, his chief of staff is following the rules and the laws and not talking to him, or B, he thinks his chief of staff is going to break all laws and treason to give him top secret information that he has no right to get without that clearance, Angus.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that Pierre Poilievre is playing politics with this topic. He's clearly a very slippery character. Well, he's a politician after all. And I think you say, James, you're absolutely bang on there. I think very clearly he is playing politics with this whole affair. And Baz News, in fact, have released a very powerful piece on their website where they title it "Pierre Poilievre is soft on Indian government organised crime," and I think they're right to some degree. I think yes, he clearly is soft on Indian government organised crime, but again, I think the motive behind his response to this is quite different. It's not that he's just soft on organised crime from India. He's actually seeing political opportunity here. He's playing political opportunism here. He's released his own statement, and it was a very short, it's like 100-word statement that says really not very much other than, you know, we think it's a pretty disgusting act and we'll do everything we can, etc., etc. But again, it's pretty anodyne, it's pretty sterile language. It's not really saying very much more than he absolutely has to. And the final paragraph, and again, Baz News picks this up, the very final paragraph of his very short statement says, "For 9 years, the Liberal government has failed to keep our people safe or to take national security and foreign interference seriously. Because of that, Canada has become a playground for these activities." That's a very loaded statement. That's a very loaded paragraph. Again, firstly, he's playing politics with this issue. He's basically saying it's the Liberal government's fault. It's all the Liberal government who are at fault here. It's not India. It's the Liberal government. And again, Canada has become a playground for these activities. Again, he's following this Indian narrative. He's actually, by implication, by extension, he's actually trying to surreptitiously bring in this, it's the Khalistani activists, it's the Khalistani terrorists. Again, he's showing his right-wing credentials here. He's playing the Indian game. He's saying, actually, part of the blame is clearly on the Khalistanis here. It's not just India at fault here. So firstly, he's blaming Trudeau. Secondly, he's blaming the Khalistanis. So it's a pretty awful statement here. And I think Baz News has hit the nail on the head with their statement, basically pulling this apart, saying this is a pretty dangerous statement coming from Poilievre. And I think if you have any doubts about how you feel about Pierre Poilievre, I think that statement alone, I think, just lays out his credentials in very clear language. So now, unsurprisingly, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has been very vocal about the issue. And he himself has released a statement which has included a call to ban Hindutva groups like the RSS in Canada and to help clamp down on avenues which support India's interference in Canada. And his statement, again, a much more lengthy, much more powerful statement, unsurprisingly. And he says that the New Democrats are extremely worried about the information released by the RCMP, and the Sikh community particularly have been stalked by fear, threats, harassment and violence, including extortion, violence, etc., etc. And he said that Canada has long held this credible evidence that Modi's government was involved in the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And yes, we've been proved right yet again. And he said that his party's main priority is to ensure that all Canadians are safe in our country, free from extortion, violence and electoral interference, etc., etc. So he urges all leaders to get their security clearance. There's a nod to Mr. Poilievre there. That's a very clear accusation. And hold the Modi government accountable and refuse to look the other way. And he supports today's decision to expel the diplomats. And we're calling on the government of India yet again to put diplomatic sanctions against India in place, including banning the RSS. So again, he's a lot more forceful. His statement says an awful lot more than Poilievre's. And I think this statement is a much better nod to democratic values and credentials than the Conservative leader's statement. And I think if you put these side by side, I think it's very clear which party stands for the basic principles of democracy and which doesn't. So, yeah, I think that says an awful lot in those two statements side by side. So also, another interesting angle to all this is that there was another murder a year or so ago of another Khalistani activist. This was Sukhdul Singh Gill. Now, Sukhdul Singh Gill's death, he was murdered in Winnipeg last year. And it's believed now this may be linked to this same campaign of violence against Sikhs across North America, and of course the Nijjar and Panoon case. And it was raised at the time a year ago, and criminally it hasn't yet been linked. The law enforcement haven't publicly linked this murder to the case of Panoon and Nijjar and others. But now it turns out that potentially this murder was linked to those same murders. And I think the RCMP are now starting to reopen this very case to say, hang on a second, this could be part of a wider a wider net of killings across North America and potentially globally. We've of course reported on killings in Pakistan and of course Abdul Singh Kandar. It's very clear, as we've said, James, this plot is much wider in its scope, and so it's likely that the case of Sukhdev Singh Gill could also be reopened in context of the killing. Right, let's move away from Canada now. Let's quickly touch on the US because we are running out of time. The US, we've talked about at length. James, you talked about the indictment against Yadav. We've talked about the US response. Again, pretty robust overall and a lot more robust than the other three nations down under and in the UK. So well done to the US. Let's move on now, and I'll just quickly touch on the Sikh coalition. Likewise, they released a statement over the last couple of days. Again, a very powerfully worded statement. Again, calling on much more robust action against India, and so again, all very predictable, all very robust, and I think pretty much sums up the reaction of the Sikh community across the US and by extension the whole of North America. Now, let's quickly look at Down Under. Australia has been, I would say, embarrassingly quiet and silent in their response, and it's taken David Shoebridge, again, a regular, outspoken critic of India and an outspoken critic and highlighter of transnational repression. He's released a statement on the 16th to say it's now been over 24 hours since Canada made the shocking announcement, and yet since then there has been nothing but silence from Australia. It's times like this that values matter. We must be in solidarity with the Canadian people, the Sikh community worldwide, our Sikh community right here, and the millions of people across India who also demand a government that respects all equally. Well done, Senator Shoebridge. And that was co-signed by Senator Jordan Steele-John, another Green. So well done. It's taken the Green Party of Australia to stand up publicly and make a statement like this. Where is Albanese? Where is your statement, Mr. Albanese? We're waiting for something a lot more robust from you. Likewise, New Zealand, the Foreign Minister Winston Peters-Wellington, there's a wonderful name, has been briefed by Ottawa about the investigations into violence and threats of violence against members of the South Asian community. New Zealand, where a national conference on transnational repression was held last year, also hosts a khalistan referendum on the 17th of November, don't forget that, which is expected to attract negative comment and possibly disruptive effort from Indian nationalists. So New Zealand has at least made a few statements, particularly through its Foreign Minister, Winston Peters-Wellington, but again, nothing too robust from them. So Down Under being, I would say, a little bit disappointingly silent about matters. Now, I'll tell you who hasn't been silent. That's been Hindutva. Now, across social media, unsurprisingly, there's been a wave of Hindutva activists have been out there. Anytime that the Sikh community have been posting up all this ongoing mainstream news outlets reporting on the terrible activities from India, of course Hindutva are all over it, and they've been posting up all sorts of anti-Khalistan, anti-Western propaganda. They've been showing up these memes, videos, pretty horrible videos. Tearing, and Jagmeet Singh has been, and I'll show up a video here now. Jagmeet Singh has been the target, of course, unsurprisingly, across Western social media, trying to tear him down, trying to undermine his very robust response. So all sorts of accounts, all sorts of well-known Hindutva accounts have been right on this. They've been posting up, spreading this Hindutva propaganda, this pro-Modi, this pro-Hindu propaganda. It's all out there. Of course, we had the Indian airline bomb threats, and in fact, I didn't have time to actually search it out. But when I was interviewing Dr. Sandhu, Bakshi Sandhu, on what day was it? It was Thursday afternoon here in the UK. Part of that interview had a very loud bang, which actually rather disturbed me. I thought my building was collapsing around me. I'll tell you what it was. It was the sonic boom of British RAF jets breaking the sound barrier. Why? Because one of those bomb hoax threat jets was actually over London and over this area, and it was the British RAF scrambled at the speed of sound. They had to break the sound barrier, which normally they're not allowed to do over the UK land, and because of the sonic boom. That boom during my interview with Dr. Sandhu was actually the RAF chasing one of these jets that had allegedly had a bomb on board. So yeah, very, very real going on there. So there you have it, James. A very brief response from you because we're running out of time. I would say a pretty robust, on the whole, response to India, calling big calls for India to be called a rogue state.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add to that, Angus, is whether or not the UK is trying to negotiate still for something to do with JAGTAR, or Jaggy as everybody knows him. But it could be that they are playing a political game that way to negotiate some type of agreement there. So we don't know. That could be, but that would be the only reason I could see them not coming out much stronger.
Yeah, I think you're right. As we've said in the past on several occasions, the UK is actually caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, yeah, it's supposed to stand up for democracy. It knows it has to stand up for democracy. But on the other hand, yes, it's got vested interests. Firstly, it's got the trade deal, which is desperate to tie it with India. Secondly, it does have historical, cultural connections with India on many levels. But as you rightly say, James, it is trying, at the end of the day, it's got to try and release Avtar Singh Jaggi, because, yeah, he still is a British citizen. And the British government is in a very embarrassing situation of a British citizen being held against all rules of international law, and they've got to try and release him. So, yeah, I would say you're pretty bang on the nose there, James. Right, let's move on very quickly because we are running out of time. We've got a lot of comments to get through today, so apologies if we rush through your comments today because we've got a lot to get through, a lot of big talking points, which I'd love to do justice to, but unfortunately we don't have the time to deal with them all as we would very much like to. But anyway, my interview with Dr. Sandhu, very interesting interview. Go look it up on the channel. We talked a lot about Khalistan. We talked a lot about this issue of what India's been up to and their bad behaviour. And Amrik says their only language that Gujaratis understand basically is money. Yes, we've touched on this before. We talked about the Punjab, the northwestern states of India, very much a pretty robust, strong backbone, genetically speaking. The Sikh community particularly, but the Gujaratis are known for their money. They get involved in politics, the dirty parts of social affairs. That seems to be what the Gujaratis are more interested in. So, yeah, I think your comments bang on the nose there. Now, Dr. Sandhu did hold up his book that he's written, and Dean Singh asked, where can we get this book? I don't know. I've actually asked Dr. Sandhu directly, can you please let us know where we can buy this book and send us a link? I will let you know. We'll post up in due course. I'll let you know on that. So thank you for your question. SSC Tin says 1.5 lakh Sikhs have been killed in India since 1984. Nobody's been punished today. The justice system doesn't really seem to work in India. You're right. Punjab is not India. Says it's not 1.5, it's 3.5 lakh Sikhs. Freddie Mercury comes in and says, I understand the reason for wanting Khalistan, but the only problem is capacity. Sikhs don't have the means. Now, this is a curious comment, James. I wonder, are you trying to say, Freddie Mercury, that you don't think that the Sikh community has enough resources to sources? I think the valid point here, if this is your point, is setting up a new country is massive. It requires a huge amount of finance, resources, organisation, infrastructure, etc. But I would say there is a very, very powerful global movement, not just in the Sikh community, but also outside the Sikh community, who actually are interested in establishing Khalistan. I think money will come from all sorts of sources, including Western governments. I think they will be behind Khalistan. And likewise, I think there will be a huge amount of assistance from outside the Sikh community to establish Khalistan, because again, Khalistan, the establishment of Khalistan, has a huge strategic advantage for the West. So I think the resources will be there to assist the Sikh community to establish Khalistan. Would you not agree, James?
I would agree. And if they're talking where it says the only problem is capacity, if they're referring to a population-wise, I think that they're overlooking the fact that if Khalistan, or when Khalistan is formed, that people from all over the world are going to want to live there. It's going to be a place of acceptance, of humanity, of peace. And that I think that they're overlooking as well.
Yeah, and don't forget, the Sikh empire back in the 19th century was made up of all sorts of different people of different religions and backgrounds and ethnicities. And that's what Khalistan will be. As many as our commenters have said, it's likely that many Hindus will want to move to Khalistan, again, because of the values that Khalistan will represent. So, yeah, I would say that's probably more the case. Now, Ashley Kandar, our resident counter voice, has actually come, I think, with a very sensible comment here. Look, whatever this guy says, what Ashley's saying is that, look, this Khalistan referendum in Punjab is you're saying, look, what are the rules? Who's going to be allowed to vote in this referendum? You can't just say it can only be Sikhs outside of Khalistan who can vote, or outside of Punjab who can vote in this, because that's not fair, that's racist. You've got to set what are the boundaries, what are the parameters of who's going to be allowed to vote in this referendum in the Punjab? Because you can't include some and exclude others. I think this is a very sensible comment, actually, Ashley Kandar, for once. Thank you for this comment. I think you bang on the nose here. And I think that you're right. I think if you establish a referendum, the parameters of who is allowed to vote and who isn't, and this actually reflects what happened in the Scottish referendum here in the UK, the Scottish independence referendum. And there was an argument that Scottish people living outside Scotland should have been allowed to vote. I can't actually remember if they were allowed to. I don't think they were in the end. I think they set the parameters. I, at the time, was an Englishman living in Scotland at the time. I was given a vote in the Scottish independence referendum, but I don't think Scottish living outside Scotland at the time were allowed to vote. And I think this actually reflects this same argument. So an interesting point there, James.
Absolutely, and I honestly don't remember how they worked it for Quebec, for the province of Quebec, when they had their referendum and on separatism. So I don't want to comment on it because I don't recall how that worked.
Yeah, so yeah, I think actually, Canada, you came up with a really important point, and I think that's something that the pro-Khalistan movement is going to have to set out very clearly. I'm sure they've already thought about it, and I'm sure they've already got their ideas in mind. But yeah, that is a very, very important point. Right, 1S1N2 comes up with a cracking comment. I think this is a very, very insightful comment. India thinks that Trudeau will lose the next election. They feel they've enough influence on the Conservatives to weather the storm and then continue with Trudeau discredited. So the point here is that it doesn't matter actually what's happening at the moment, because Trudeau is going to be out of power at the end of this year. The Conservatives are clearly pro-right-wing India. So all this is just going to go away, James. What do you think?
It's possible. I mean, who would have seen the way U.S. politics has gone and the upsets there? So again, it's hard to say what's going to happen in a federal election here. And also to keep in mind how much there is foreign interference it's going to play in the election results this year. I'm confident that there's going to be a lot of interference, not just from India, but from other states as well. So.
Yeah, I think, personally, I think because of the international factor here, I don't think it will go away. There's just too many countries now involved at quite a vocal public level. But I think this point is absolutely on the nose. I think, yeah, what will happen if and when Trudeau loses the election? What's going to happen locally in Canada on this response? I don't think it will be as robust, of course, if it is Poilievre in power. So I think the key there is get Jagmeet Singh in power as much as possible. So.
Yeah, let's hope if it's not Trudeau, it's Jagmeet either.
Indeed. Well, let's see. It's going to be an interesting time in Canada in the foreseeable. So Gary Chakdek says, oh, this is a good point. Bishnoi is a fake name. And he goes on at length about this. And basically, I think the argument here is actually Lawrence Bishnoi is almost a fictional character now. In reality, he does exist. But what he's saying here, I think the concept is that Lawrence Bishnoi essentially it's a fake name. This guy is just another agent. And it could be actually one of many people who are rolling out this agenda from RAW. And I think he's saying that Bishnoi is just another foot soldier, and it doesn't almost matter who Bishnoi is. He's just one foot soldier of many in the payroll of RAW, and I think you probably bang on with that. Now, but the second part of your point here is if foreign governments don't punish India now, the chances are in future that India will actually extend this, and they'll start targeting Caucasian leaders or white or Asian or black leaders who don't agree with the Indian agenda. And I think you're right here. I think if the international community doesn't nip this in the bud now, India will be encouraged to actually start extending this campaign to other people outside the Sikh community and outside the Indian diaspora. I think he's got a point there, James.
Absolutely. And, it's something that, as I just stated, that I think there's going to be more interference going on before before we see less.
Yeah, and I think the point, I think that you're bang on with this, because India has been encouraged by the lack of response once they killed Najjar and others, is that Canada, US, the West basically didn't, well, apart from Trudeau, did stand up to his credit, but the response was pretty muted. And India thought, you know what, we're getting away with this, let's carry on. And as many people said, they've escalated their campaign. So India have been encouraged, because of the lack of robust response, they've been encouraged to go out and kill more Khalistani campaigners. And likewise, the response again has been pretty muted. So they think, well, if we can get away with killing Khalistanis, let's start killing white people we don't like. So yeah, I think this point is right. I think, and actually, I think the West is now waking up to this, saying, look, we've got to nip this in the bud. We cannot let India become a rogue state like Russia, because even Russia daren't go as far as India at the moment are pushing. And I've talked about the rules of the game. Russia know the rules of the game. They push the boundaries, but they've always kept within, generally speaking, the rules of the game. India don't know the rules of the game. Right. They're like a child playing in the adults' room at the moment, and they're making a big mess of it. And I think the West is now realising we've got to stamp down on India, because they're not playing by the rules. They need to be taught a lesson. So I think India is about to be taught a pretty robust lesson by the West. Okay, APS Rosary. Another one of our anti-Khalistanis says, go to the Punjab and fight for Khalistan. Stop doing it in the West. Nobody cares about it here. Well, I would say to that, actually, a lot of people do care about it, as you're finding out. Now, Sonu Brar says, then why Amritpal Singh is in jail? How come he even became an MP from jail? It speaks for itself. Good point. And APS Rosebery comes back and says, good for him. Now, anyone who supports him to go to Punjab, yeah, I think you're right when credentials are coming here. Basically, they can't, as Sonu Brar says, you cannot fight for Khalistan in India, because if you do, you end up in jail. That's not democracy. That's why we have to do it in the West, because people are too scared to do it in the Punjab, where it would actually happen. Now, again, I'll draw parallels to Quebec and to Scotland. Is there anybody who fights for independence in Scotland and Quebec? They can do it loudly, vocally, in the streets, waving flags politically. They can burn flags. They can shout loud from every rooftop, pro-independence, and nothing happens to them, because that's what democracy stands for. You cannot do that in the Punjab, because like Amritpal Singh, you end up in jail. So unfortunately, APS Rosary, if that's the sort of society that you want to live in, then I'm afraid one day they will come for you. Learn that lesson. Right, rushing on, running out of time. And, the flag burning, James. Oh, sorry, James.
Oh, I just said absolutely. Go ahead.
Right. Now, the flag burning issue raises once again. 1S1 and 2 says in response to actually Kandar's comment about flag burning. Now, this is powerful. Yes, flags get burnt as an act of defiance, as opposed to the burning of people that stand up to tyranny and challenge oppression and criminal government institutions. So it's one thing burning flags, but when you start burning people in genocides, that's a different matter, is it not, James? Bam! I think that's quite a powerful response.
Yeah, absolutely. A great response. I love it. And not only burning them physically, but also through the acid attacks that we've seen happen in the past.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think that's quite a powerful response to that. So, Harminder Singh Tandy. Oh, how about this one? Washington Post and The Wire, you lot are a bloody joke. Look, you both haven't got two brain cells to rub together, James. I guess that's aimed at us too.
Well, I guess that I'll have to go out looking for the lost ones.
Well, I don't even want to respond to that, but thank you very much for your comment. And I would say, yeah, we do. We actually use many sources for our news items. Quite often we use the Washington Post, we do use The Wire, but we also use many other mainstream news outlets and lots of news agencies, etc. So we draw the news from where we can, and we usually corroborate everything against many different sources. If we're speculating something, we will always say that we're speculating something. All we care about is the truth. And if we're not sure about it, we'll say, well, this is what we've heard. We don't know if it's true. We'll try and corroborate it, etc., etc. So, but thank you anyway. And well, yeah, if we've got two brain cells, at least we're making the most of them. So thank you for that. John Adams says, looks like this channel has got the guts to take on India's misinformation against the West and the Sikhs. Thank you, sir. Well, thank you. James and I do stand up for the truth. We do our best, and but we do rely on people like yourself in the audience for your support and also for your comments. So thank you very much indeed. Keep those comments coming. Final page of comments. Canada has become a haven for India's wanted gangsters. Trudeau's been safeguarding these gangs. Canada has over 26 unapproved extradition requests from India. These continue to be a bone of contention for the two nations' bilateral ties. Yes, actually, you're right about this. There are a lot of unapproved extradition requests from India. And this is a bone of contention between India and Canada. Now, of course, this has given ammunition to Hindutva, saying, look, you're harbouring all these terrorists. We've got all these outstanding extradition requests for Canada. Why won't you release them for justice? Well, I'm afraid my response really reflects Canada's response. I'm sure, James, you've got a comment on this. Is that every time, and this happens anywhere in the West, anytime any nation, and every nation has the right to request to extradite criminals from foreign soil, from the UK soil, Canada's, the US's soil. But they have to present the evidence so that the courts within those same nations can then review that evidence, and if they feel on the balance of probability that there is a genuine case to answer, they will agree to that extradition request. This is democracy. This is the rule of law, because it's designed to prevent spurious political attacks. It's designed to prevent exactly what's going on here. It's designed to prevent rogue governments trying to get their hands on political dissidents so they can basically either imprison them or kill them. And this is what's happening with Khalistanis. The proof is laid out in the last couple of weeks for all to see. The Indian government is killing Khalistani activists. So when India is presenting their extradition request to Canada, all 26 of them, the evidence, if it was there, and it has already been seen by Canadian law enforcement, they reviewed this evidence and they rejected it. They're saying there is not enough evidence on the balance of legal probability that these people are what you say they are. Yeah. But there is more evidence to prove that they are political dissidents. They are political people. They are your political enemies. And we fear for their life and their rights of freedom and justice if we extradite them to India. In other words, we don't trust you, India. We know you're lying. That's basically, in simple language, what it boils down to, James.
Absolutely, Angus, and we have a responsibility to Canadian citizens or anyone else on Canadian soil that if we're going to hand them over to a foreign government for any type of prosecution, the overwhelming abundance of evidence has to be credible. And let's just remind everybody that even you and I could be labeled as terrorists, Angus, under the way that the India law works. And so is it really that they are terrorists, or is it just the India government trying to shut them up? And that's something that we see all of the time. So the threshold of evidence has not been met to be able to approve extradition to India, plain and simple. And, Canada would be extraditing. They've done it in the past where if there is credible evidence and there is no death penalty on the table, those are the main criterias.
Yeah, and I think we only need to look at Amritpal Singh and Jagtar Singh Johal, two prime examples who've been imprisoned under the NSA, under the UAPA. These are pieces of legislation that basically give the Indian government carte blanche to imprison forever, without trial, without any justice, to their political opponents. That's what's happened to Amritpal Singh. That's what's happened to Jagtar Singh Johal. That's why Canada and the West will not extradite Khalistan activists to India, because they know exactly what's going to happen. This is the sad reality of India. It is not a democratic nation anymore. It does not follow democratic rule of law. So 987, thank you very much for your comment. I think you're right in many ways, but unfortunately the harsh reality is India, the West know India for what it is. They understand now, and increasingly so, they're recognising India for exactly what it is. It's a nation going rogue. Final comment from Nirmal Singh. Angus and James, we want you to work and live with us in Khalistan. Khalistan, Zindabad. Love Australia. Well, Nirmal Singh, thank you very much indeed. I don't know if we'll end up living in Khalistan, but certainly we would love to visit on a very regular basis. Who knows, we might even have a little holiday shack somewhere where it's a lot warmer than here in the UK, James. Actually, that's a good idea. We may very well come and winter in Khalistan, where it's a lot warmer than here in cold, blustery UK and the West. But thank you very much indeed for your comment. And thank you for all your comments. Absolutely, we will. I very much look forward to that day. So, but there, unfortunately, we must draw things to a close. We are way over time as usual, but thank you very much indeed for watching Perspectives. Thank you for all your comments. Do keep them coming. We do appreciate them. There's been fantastic comments, loads of comments, and there's so many more I wish we could have covered. Thank you for all our critics as well, for your wonderful critical comments. Always good for a discussion as well. Of course, don't forget you can email us directly at message@satellitetv.com if there's something you'd like to email us about. Thank you for many of your emails. I had wanted to cover many of those, but again, we've been short of time to cover them, but we'll try and do that in future shows. Thank you for those, but do keep them coming. But we must wrap up Perspectives for another day. Thank you so much for watching. It is a goodbye from me, and it's a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.